The White House recently released a national security strategy paper that says Europe is facing civilizational erasure. Not economic decline, civilizational erasure. And this is not coming from European populists or firebrands. It's not coming from alternative media. It's coming from the U.S. government, from the White House. And from polling data on to economic information and migration numbers, everything does seem to be pointing in one direction. The question really is not whether Europe has major existential problems. The question is, why are the elites there responding to those problems in ways that seem to make them far worse? Here I want to make three main arguments. One is that Europe's elites are preparing for war instead of legitimacy. And when I say war, I mean war on a big scale, world war. They're preparing for that instead of legitimacy. Two, they're trying to manage demographic collapse through mass migration and population replacement rather than social renewal. We see essentially none of these countries are serious about social renewal, maybe with the exception of Hungary. But the rest of them, they're not serious about this at all. And the elites, they're just looking to replace the population rather than solve the problem. And three, they're suppressing dissent instead of rebuilding consent. And this is a problem throughout Europe. The Vice President of the United States has talked about it several times. J.D. Vance has chided European leaders on this very issue. But let's start with number one, war as elite substitution for legitimacy. So when elites lose popular consent, they seek eternal threats to unify authority. You can see that throughout world history. It's always been like this. And in European leaders right now, they have collapsing approval rating numbers. We've talked about this in the shorts that we do throughout the week. But in the UK, Starmer, it has a approval rating of 19%. 19%. That's from focal data. That's remarkable. You know, we've had some really terrible presidents in the United States, but I don't know if any of them have gotten down to a 19% approval rating. Over in France, Macron is even worse, significantly worse. I didn't even know if numbers this low were possible in these polls, but he is at 11%, and that's from Varian Group. 11%. Almost no one in France supports Macron, and here he is, the president of the country. What kind of system is that? It's pretty incredible. And then over in Germany, we have Merz, and he's doing a little bit better than the other two, but still pretty terrible at 23%, and that's from Forza. The Merz is at 23%. Even though he's the best among the three, I don't remember any U.S. president getting down that low in my lifetime. And we've had some pretty terrible ones lately, but 23%, very, very low. So these presidents and prime ministers and so forth, they have very weak mandates. One, look at France. They can't pass a budget right now. And they've had 6 prime ministers since 2019. 6. This is dysfunction. And they have a fractured electorate in France, not just in France, but throughout Europe. So you see working class supporters used to support the labor parties in Europe, labor parties and union parties. But now the working class supports reform in the UK, National Rally in France, and the AFD in Germany. More and more, the working class is going more and more for these parties, right-wing populist parties. Reform in the UK, National Rally in France, and the AFD in Germany. And it's like this in some of the smaller countries in Europe as well. But despite this, we have escalating war rhetoric, and we've covered this extensively in our shorts. We have escalating war rhetoric from these European elites. So, for example, you have French General Fabien Mandon. He's the chief of the defense staff. He said that people must accept suffering and accept losing their children. You have Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. He said that we need to prepare for war like our grandparents endured. So, what is he talking about there exactly? He's talking about World War II, like our grandparents. So he wants a World War II level event in Europe. Or maybe he doesn't want it, but he's pushing. It seems like he does because he's pushing hard in that direction every day, it seems like. Now, that war, of course, it changed all the borders, but it also killed tens of millions of people. And so a war like that would be a disaster. But you also hear a lot of talk of sacrifice. You hear a lot of these nowadays. British Chief of Defence Staff, the Air Chief Marshal, Sir Richard Knighton, he said that the UK needs a wartime mindset. And he said that more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means. Uh, so there's a lot of the talk like this lately, a lot of talk, as these European leaders are trying to push their populations more towards this mindset to distract them from problems at home, distract them from the mass migration, from the deindustrialization, from the fact that nobody supports these leaders. Distract them with all that with talk of World War. And World War is pretty distracting. Maybe it's a good plan politically. But you also have the normalization of inevitability. And there's been a lot of talk about this lately. We have talk about whether there's going to be a war between the West and Russia or the West and China in 2028 or 2030. So it's just one or the other. It's going to happen. Is it going to be this year or is it going to be that year? There's a lot of talk like that in the news lately from a lot of these European leaders about the inevitability of all of this. And war becomes very attractive when legitimacy runs out. You've seen this in Israel with Netanyahu. He basically needs the war against the Palestinians to continue. He needs a war in Syria and Lebanon and Iran, all the various countries that he is bombing at the moment. He needs that to continue to avoid going to jail. He was on the brink of going to jail before all of this started. You saw it in a while back now, but when I was younger, with President Clinton, he fired missiles at an aspirin factory in Sudan, a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, and it was widely seen as just bolstering his poll numbers. But it works. It works when these leaders, when their legitimacy runs out, when they become unpopular, they fire some missiles, they start a war, they start some kind of foreign conflict, and they get the people to focus on that instead of the problems, the mess they've made of things at home. So now let's look at our second argument, mass migration. So Europe's demographic crisis is very real. It's very real. But the response has been managerial, not civilizational. The European elites, they're not taking this serious. And why is that? Because this demographic change, it's not like the weather. We're not talking about something that's spontaneous. Towns in Germany don't become Turkish on their own. They're changed from German to Turkish due to government policy. And British towns, they don't evolve to become Indian on their own. That's a government policy to change them from British to Indian. So we have falling birth rates in all of Europe, throughout Europe. In Spain right now, the fertility rate is 1.1. Now you need a little over 2.0 to maintain your population, to not shrink, to not start to die off. Spain's at half of that, at 1.1. So they're dying off pretty rapidly. Italy, the fertility rate, 1.2. Germany, 1.3. This is a problem throughout Europe. And it's acknowledged. I will say that it's acknowledged now more so than in the past. But European families, they're not being formed, or they are infertile. And we have the promotion of alternative lifestyles. We have a lot of different things that goes into this infertility, but it's a major problem. And if Europe doesn't fix this problem, then it won't have to worry about any other problems, because there won't be any Europeans around be around to worry about these other problems. But you also see migration framed as economic necessity. We hear that in the United States a lot. Anytime there's talk about cutting migration, we have, I think, 1 million legal immigrants every year, in addition to the million or so illegal immigrants you normally get every year. And anytime there's talk about cutting this number, then the various business advocacy groups will come out and say, "Oh, we have to have these workers. We have to have this cheap labor. We can't afford to pay people working, a living wage, a working wage, a family wage. We have to have these cheap workers from the third world." And so it's migration is framed like this a lot, especially in the business community. It's also framed in a moral sense. I would say more in the past, but it's still somewhat. So it's sometimes framed as a way to make amends for racism, for whiteness. So we need mass migration to prove that we're not racist anymore. Um, so anyhow, instead of asking why Europeans are not forming families, the elites import populations, and then they tell us that we better not complain too loudly about it, because all this is for our own good in the end. Number 3, censorship. So this is the final stage, really, of elite insecurity. When war fails to unify and migration fails to stabilize, then the remaining tool is control. And so we see speech restrictions in Europe, and not just about World War II, but you have other speech restrictions as well. And now there's a lot of talk again about disinformation. So I thought that this had gone away with COVID, but now we have this new European democracy shield to shut down disinformation and to promote democracy. And these are from the same people, by the way, these same elites who threw out the election in Romania because the liberal warmonger there didn't win. So we can throw out elections when, when our side doesn't win, but when the other side, when they promote their ideas, we have to shut that down as disinformation. And we have to promote democracy as an alternative to that disinformation. You see how all of this is framed. We also see delegitimization as of the opposition to all this as immoral or as dangerous. So we hear people called Putin's puppet if they're anti-war, or we hear people called Hitler if they're against mass migration. If you don't want to see German towns turned into Turkish towns or British towns turned into Indian towns, then you're an evil person, and they'll label you like this. But war, migration, and censorship, they're not separate issues. These are responses to the same problem. What we have is a ruling class that no longer believes it can persuade its own people. And if Europe's elites genuinely believe that their societies are eroding, then why are they choosing war, demographic replacement, and censorship instead of rebuilding legitimacy and sovereignty and consent? If they don't change, then who does Europe actually belong to in 20 years? I'm curious how y'all see this. Be sure to comment below. Thanks for watching.